Thank you very much for the invitation. We are going to speak in this about an hour about building vocational identity. That is, how can I interiorize into it a part of myself, the identity that I am supposed to have. And here we find a first question. If I am a priest and I have my vocation and I have had a lot of time, a lot of years of formation of initial vocation, so it is something that the vocation is vocation something that has been built in some way, or is it not something that you have received? The question is not has sense because I remember that being in a house of formation, one of the superiors was doing a nice speech to the people who were there, saying, because your vocation is service, because your vocation is doing apostolate, because your vocation is having a close relationship with God. And I know many of those people because they were their spiritual director. And I said, well, it is not the identity of many of them because they are beginning the path of their vocation. They are growing in that identity. So the problem of taking for granted that they have that identity has a risk. First of all, that from the point of view of psychology, it is not true. Psychology is something that you are developing in yourself, mainly in adolescence, and it grows until the end of your life. If you say you have the identity, you can save the person the task of building that identity, to ask himself or herself if she has the concept of herself that is supposed to have, or instead she had to grow, to think, to pray, to meditate, to ask, and to confront herself to other people. So identity should be something that you don't only receive, that you are not, it is not something that you are told that you have to be. It is something that you are growing little by little. Psychology is a psychological concept. If you go to the Bible, it is not, the concept is not present practically. And it is not present in the sense that we use now. This concept began more or less in the 60s when some American psychologists began using it, and then it is also taken by the church to say identity can be useful mainly in the task of formation because it is the subjective concept that one has on themselves. So identity, we can say, is the answer of the questions, who am I, what am I? It is like an axis of coordinates in which I can put myself. And it is different, my identity, to the identity of the person that I have in front of me, that is seated at my right and at my left. Every one of us has a different identity. Identity that is common in some points with some of the people, mainly if they share my vocation, but it is exclusive of mine because all of us have their own story, and so we have built their vocation from different perspectives. We share some things, but others are specific of all of us. So vocation, identity is when you answer that question, who are I or what am I, you can answer it from different point of view. You can say I am an American, I am a man, I am a woman, I am from this or that family with these hobbies, with this vocation in the church. So it can be a lot of things. But what does the identity is to put an order and a hierarchy in that identity, in such a way that I say I am all of those things, but there is something in the top that explains more who am I. The fact of being of that country is something that explains a lot of what I am, but the fact of having received that vocation is something that explains a lot more who am I. At the point that if my vocation asks me to leave my country and go to another place, I will do it happily, with an effort, with a sense of sacrifice, but I will do, because it is more important for me to be a Christian, to be a part of this or that institution, than to be simply an American. This psychologist that we see here, Gordon Allport, he's one of the fathers of the psychology of personality, spoke about 6 characteristics of a mature personality that should be present at the end of adolescence. The sense of extension of the self, the fact that the person is not anymore egocentric and individualist, but he feels part of a thing, of a community that is bigger than him, and so he's happy to share that. The capacity of having an emotional relationship with other people, that is to be empathetic, to take care of other people, having emotional security, that means being able to control his passions, his instincts, his fears, a realistic perception, the capacity of doing a just measure of the ambient, external, but also a self-objectivation, which means the capacity to know himself. And finally, there is what I wanted to stop a little more, what he calls a unified philosophy of life. The psychologist, even if he was not very religious and he didn't like very much the structure or institutional religions, he said that the vocation, general vocation, is something that must be present at the end of adolescence. It can be the professional vocation, it can be the orientation to marriage or to do something in the life. He says that this unifying philosophy of life, for him it is the end or ends for which the person has chosen to live, which directs the actions and gives meaning to the world existence. For us, who did a choice to devote our lives to God, answering his call, this philosophy is really our vocation. It is identified. It is the thing for which we want to live. It is a thing that addresses all my actions and gives a meaning to my existence. He says that those philosophies can be six kinds. It can be that you choose to be a theoretical, the search of the truth, the person who is closed in a laboratory, in an office, studying, doing research, the utilitarian, the one who wants also the useful, to work for earning money, an example, the aesthetic, the poet, the artist who wants harmony, the social, the one who wants love to help other people, religious, the people who want power, who want to dominate, who want to impose their opinion to other people, and finally the religious, which is the search for unity, for being close to something that is bigger to you, to have some kind of relationship with God or with the force or with something transcendent to you. So he says that these comprehensibility schemes give you a directivity and a consistency in your life. That is, they teach you that other things that are also part of your identity have to be consistent to your choice, and that you have to live them, but in a way that is according to the choice that you have done. For example, I like very much soccer because I am Spanish. I am supporter of the team of my city, which is Betis. But for the last 35 years, I have not gone to the field, to the football scene to see my team. Why? Because I chose very young another way, and I thought that it was not good for me to go to that place. Does it mean that part of my being supported of a football team is more than a hobby? It is part of your identity. You are the supporter. But I think vocation is more important for me than supporting my football team. I try and live this part of my identity in a compatible way, which means I don't go to the football field, but I watch the highlights every week when my team plays, and I try to be more or less attentive to the players and so on. So, and this is important, that vocation shouldn't cancel those parts of your identity that are important for you. Your origin, your country, but also your family, your hobbies, your job, even if you have changed your job because of the vocation, because you were told to do other things that from an apostolic point of view were more important, and you said yes, but it does not mean that I am going not anymore to be attentive to like those things. You have to integrate all those things in your vocation. If you like to play the guitar, if you like this or that music, or you like anything. And the problem of some people who go perhaps with such a great strength and impetus to the vocation and say, my vocation is everything, and they have to renounce to other things. There is a risk that would be that vocation, instead of putting order and hierarchy in all those things that you like, and so to enriching you, to give sense to your life, if some person says, because of a not well understood sense of the gift of oneself to God and to the vocation, if you cancel those pieces of your identity, vocation will do your personality, your identity poorer, more poor. And then you will feel that instead of growing, instead of developing your personality will be weaker, will be a part of you very strong, but other parts of you, the ones that make you different, that make you specific, that make you more richer, and so there are also parts of you that make you attractive to other people. So it is important to know who am I, all the characteristics of my identity, and how I am able to make them compatible with the great goal of my life. So let us go to another psychologist. This is Erik Erikson, another of the fathers of development psychology, and he says that identity is a sum of two factors. The first one is inner sameness, which means that you are all the time the same during all your life. You can put yourself in one of these stages of life, and to say, now that I am in my 30s, 40s, 50s, or 60s, I am the same person that I used to be when I was in my 20s, when I was a teenager, but I am different. And that is life. That I am the same, but at the same time, I see that I am very different, but there is a continuity. There is a narrative in my life. I change things, but the core is always the same. So identity is that I have not said, I am not this anymore, but I am this one, but hopefully a little better, a better version of myself. And identity, he says, is not only the how I consider myself, and I like it very much, but identity has to see also with how other people look at me, how other people consider me. And it is very important in vocation to in the church. It is not only that you feel that I am a very good whatever in your institution. It means also how other people see you. And when you find some people who say, hey, you don't look a Christian or a part of this vocation because you were supposed to do, perhaps he has a bias in the concept of what a Christian is. But perhaps if he does not identify you as a part of that vocation, perhaps you are not living well your vocation. So you have to be attentive of how other people consider you. This other third one, I'm going to stop a little more in this one, this James Marshall. He's a Canadian psychologist, and he has worked a lot on vocation, on the construction, on the identity and vocational identity. He says that identity can be defined as an internal, self-constructed, dynamic organization of impulses, capabilities, beliefs, and an individual history. I like very much this definition because you can consider it as the definition of the identity of everyone, but especially of the identity of a person who had decided to give his or her life to God. It is something internal. It is not the concept that other people have on me or the thing that other people say that I have to be. Remember, at the beginning, this formator say, your identity is, no, my identity. And the person who best knows himself must be one, must be the subject. Sometimes I get a little nervous. I understand the expression, but I don't like it at all when somebody says, the person who knows you the best is the person who receives your spiritual direction. I say, wow, if it is real, there is a big problem in the person who looks for that spiritual direction. If the people who listen to you knows to you better than yourself, there is a great problem. It must be you who know yourself best, and then you can do the examination of conscience, and you can speak about you and your interests and your feeling and so on. It is self-constructed. We have spoken about that. It is dynamic, which means that it's like a building, like the skyscrapers. The skyscrapers are not rigid, because if they were rigid, with a small earthquake or even with the wind, they might rock. A good building must be a little flexible. So that is also the personality. It must be something flexible because otherwise it won't be able to adapt to life. Life is change. We are going to speak about that, and even we're going to speak about crisis. And if you are too static, if you are rigid, then you won't be able to give the right answer to the new problems. So, continuous Marcia, it is an organization of impulses, of capabilities, beliefs, and the individual history. All of us have their own history that begins with in the conception. So it begins in the family in which we have been born, and that is part of our identity. That is very important because even if you have been born in a broken family, in a destructured family, in a family in which there was not attention, care, love, and so on, even if there were other bigger problems, that is part of your identity. And that is one of the reasons for which now that unfortunately we have more broken families in society, people, it is harder for them to build a stable personality. And many of them have to reconcile with their parents. And it's very important, mainly for a person who must have a close relationship with God. God is the Father. And what is the concept of a father for someone who didn't have a nice father, who didn't know his father, who have an abusive father or an absent father? In these cases, it can be sometimes even hard to pray our Father. I remember a few months ago speaking with to a seminarian. He had this problem. His father left the house when he was a child, and then he had that wound in himself. And then I asked him, well, but what do you do when you preach Our Father? And he told me, I have to dark the word Father, because otherwise what I receive with the word Father is pain, is abandonment, and then I cannot address to God as Father. It is very hard, but it was his reality. So I proposed him, and it helped him to reveal a little bit his interior life, to reconcile with his father, to think on him, to pray for him, to forgive him. Otherwise, it will be very difficult for him to have a good relationship with God the Father. So continues this Marcia, a well-developed identity structure, like a well-developed superego, is flexible. We have spoken about that. It is open to changes in society and to changes in relationships. This openness allows for numerous reorganizations of identity contexts through the life of a person with an archived identity, although the essential identity process remains the same, becoming stronger with each crisis. So it is what we said, speaking about Erickson. There is a essential identity process which is the same. The person is the same, but he's little by little becoming stronger when he's flexible. If he's rigid or she's rigid, you don't get stronger, you don't get new instruments to challenge the problems, to solve the problems, and so you have only, like one famous psychologist, Abraham Maslow, said, if your only instrument is a hammer, you will treat all your problems as if they were nails. And that is what happens with people that have not developed the capacity of changing, of adapting to different problems. Now Marcia here introduces one key word, which is crisis. Some people becomes a little anxious when they hear this word, but crisis does not mean that I ask myself if I have to go ahead with my vocation, with a marriage, with my career, or whatever. It means only time of change. It means that the way in which I previously I thought, I felt, I tend to relate with the other people is no longer adaptive. And so it is necessary to modify them or to find new ones. The example, the paradigm of crisis is adolescence, in which the adolescent realizes that he is not anymore a child, that he cannot anymore think, feel, relate as a child, but he's not still an adult. So he doesn't know how, but he has to have a different approach with reality. And so he becomes very insecure. It is typical of adolescence, a little frightened, but also as he's not a child, he does not want anymore that anybody show me how I have to do things. He has to explore. He has to find by themselves. Because remember, we said before, identity is something that you have to build. Obviously, with the help of other people, with the example of other people, but it is something that it is your task. Nobody can build your identity for you, neither the vocational identity. So, continues Marsha, the more developed this structure is, the more aware individuals seem to be of their own uniqueness and similarity to others. So identity gives me the sense that I am unique, that I am absolutely special, that nobody is like me, but at the same time that I have a lot of points of common with other people. It means also that I acknowledge my own strengths and weaknesses. Many times, strengths and weaknesses are the two sides of the same coin. The person who is very extroverted speaks very well, has social skills, but he's perhaps very proactive, but he's very impulsive, and so he commits a lot of errors, of mistakes, of precipitation. Instead, a person who is more introverted perhaps has less social skills and is less attractive, but he's more calm, and so he commits less errors. It will be also absurd for the extroverted to say, I want to commit as less errors of precipitation as introverted, because it is a contradiction in terms. You must know what are your weaknesses, your strengths, and try to reduce as much as possible your weaknesses without renouncing to your strengths. Otherwise, you won't be yourself. It happens also in adolescence, when instead of building their own identity, an adolescent takes the easy way of imitating, just behaving as other people say that I have to behave. So he says the less developed this structure is, the more confused individuals seem to be about their own uniqueness relative to others, and the more they have to rely on external sources to evaluate themselves. That is what we said about adolescents. They have, for a physiological reason, they are still growing in their identity, so they're either confused, they are building that, it is not still structured, so they have to look for other models, the singer, the sportsman, or what they find. Finally, another aspect of identity is that a person with a well-structured identity can arrive to intimacy, can have friends, can trust in other people. And look how beautiful he says it. That's because I took the quotation. He says, that sense of security in yourself is necessary to be able to risk the vulnerability inherent to the temporary fusion with the other. When I make a friend, when I trust someone, I make myself vulnerable, because the one can fail, can go ahead, can betray me, and so if I trust him, I take the risk of being betrayed. So he says the paradox of intimacy is that it is a strength that can only be acquired through vulnerability. If you want to have friends, if you want to love people, you have to acknowledge yourself as vulnerable. But vulnerability is only possible with the inner security of a firm identity. This is a big problem for people who have biological wounds. For example, people who suffer abandonment or who suffer abuses, or they don't trust other people, but then they have a core of lack of a well-built identity. So they cannot do the effort to, even if they do the effort, they cannot trust, they cannot show themselves vulnerable. We can find also in our apostolic people like that. So it is impossible for them, and then condemned to be unhappy for the rest of their lives and not to have intimate relationships. Absolutely not. They can do that. They should look for someone in whom to trust, and in front of whom to have vulnerability. And look, that this is something that people, celibate people who are available, that availability of the heart about which Monsignor Fernando Cáriz spoke in one of his letters, very nice concept to explain celibacy. So the person who is the spiritual director, the friend, the person who accompanies her in her interior life is a person in which she can say, I am going to trust you. So I'm going to be again vulnerable, not dependent of you, but I'm going to trust you so that you can help me to build again my identity. Otherwise, it is very difficult. Also, it has to be with friendship. One of the texts that I have uploaded in that file, in that folder that I told you, is a text I liked very much. So usually I recommend to, if you have to choose one of the texts that I have uploaded in that folder, please choose this one. The title is "The Value of Friendship in Celibacy Life." This is the most beautiful text that I have ever read about this topic, friendship and celibacy. And he speaks also about that if you want to have friends, you have to show your vulnerability and to share your intimacy. So let's go ahead. Why a camel? Because now that we have spoken about identity in general, we can go and speak about specifically the identity in the vocation, how to build it, and what are the crises that you can find during vocational life. And the statistics about crises show that there are two peak moments in those crises. Actually, two peak moments in which people leave their vocation, any kind of vocation, marriage vocation, vocation to priesthood, or vocation to institutions in the church. The first peak is the first 5 years, in which the people first 5 years after the initial vocation formation, because it is the moment in which the person has to go to the task, to the apostolate, to the job, to wherever, and then he has to test, or life is testing how deeply you have made your vocation, how much you are working by yourself or only by mottos which are not enough for you. And the second one is the middle age, the 40s. That is the second moment in which you see a lot of vocations in problems. So let's begin from the beginning of the vocation. All identity, both human and spiritual identity, is something that it is given. Because you are born in an ambient, in a family, or because you go to an institution and you say, I think that I have vocation, but I want to be formed in this vocation. And I see that there is the spirit, this is the charisma, those are the people. So give me, perhaps in a passive way, give me what I have to do, what I have to behave, first to get that identity. So identity is not only subjective, you need models. If possible, not a book as model, but people as models. But at a certain point, that identity is put in crisis. That is the adolescent crisis, when the boy or the girl says, I am not anymore the good child. I need to do my choices. I don't want to behave as you are telling me. And so you find that struggles into the family, but also it must happen also in the building of a vocational identity. We cannot survive just by saying, I am going to do everything that you tell me my formator, my director, my superior. It has also to be put in crisis so that I say, this is what you say, this is the way in which I am going to live very personally. So perhaps it will coincide with what you are telling me, but perhaps it will coincide completely. So it is put in crisis, it is chosen, it is internalized, and then it is built. The difference between a vocation that is only passive, telling you what you have to do, and a vocation that has been internalized is the same difference between a label that I put in my skin and a tattoo that has been absorbed, that is inside my skin and part of myself. So all the formation has to be in such a way broken into pieces, digested, and then absorbed so that it is part of my life, of my interiority. This Marcia says that in the adolescent crisis, and so also in the adolescent crisis that you can find in a vocation, and who if you don't live this adolescent crisis, perhaps not violent, but it must exist. The worst vocational crisis that I have seen is when the person behaved as a good child during his adolescence, perhaps because he found his vocation very young. He continued his 20s and 30s without challenging himself, and then he arrives at his 40s, and it consists in the same period, the adolescent crisis that he has been delaying, and the crisis of the mid-age. So the crisis of the phases of the crisis for the adolescent, according to this Marcia, are denial of the previous, saying I am not going anymore to behave as you are telling me, exploration of existing alternatives, seeing here and there what are other ways of living of building my maturity or building my identity that are not exactly what the other person has told me. And then the affirmation, then the choice. I want to be this. And then the commitment to the option chosen. Not only I accept once, but I grow, I make it grow for the rest of my life, because as we said, identity is never completely built. So he says that there are 4 kinds of identity after adolescence, depending on those conditions that we said, mainly exploration and commitment. A person with a high commitment but low exploration, which means that he didn't challenge what he heard, but only he accepted that, is an executor. Is a person with a great risk of becoming a voluntaristic, a perfectionistic, and a person who is not able to adapt himself to the life. In the opposite extreme, we have the moratorium, the one who is exploring all the time but does not choose a vocation, the one who is all the time in a research of what to do with his life, but in the practice he does not do anything. Perhaps the word for this Marshall is the diffusion of identity, who is the one that is not looking for anything, nor he's committing himself with anything. So he's just floating on the air without any commitment. And finally, he speaks about the identity achieved, which is when the person has explored and has done his commitment. But look that what he says, not many explorations. It is not a quantitative issue. It is high exploration. It can be that you have found your vocation when you were very young. It is great for you. But and then you did the commitment. But even if you did the commitment, you have to explore the vocation. You cannot be satisfied saying it is my area of comfort, and now I am not going to grow anymore. It could mean that you have become rigid, and so as a building who is also rigid, you can be broken with a very small earthquake, and unfortunately we have so many earthquakes in our lives. So let us speak about crises. About the crises that we find along the life and that are normal, because as these wheels, the more you walk, the more you consume yourself, and then the aspects of the weaknesses of your identity can be seen more easily. As the life cycle in general, as the biological life cycle, all these crises, all the evolution is constant, is progressive, is irreversible. It's necessary to have to live all these crises, but there are crises that are physiologic in the sense that you have to live them so as to grow. It is like in the video games, you have to play the first stage of the first screen and then to go to the second one. You cannot jump one. If you jump one, as you didn't get the instruments necessary to grow and to go to the second stage, you will have a lack of instruments, and you're going to be able to confront yourself with a life. So we're going to speak about 4 crises: 2 physiological or normal crises that everybody has to live, and 2 pathological crises. 2 crises that means that you did something wrong happened, and so not everybody has to pass through those stages, those 2 crises. Let's go to the first one. This is a book by Thomas Keating, Crisis of Faith, Crisis of Love. He says, speaking about Christ resurrected, how he appears to the disciples of Emmaus, to the Magdalene, to St. Peter in the second miraculous fishing, and people seem not to acknowledge him. Or as Peter, when they were eating the fish that they have fished, they say they didn't ask him who he was because they knew that it was him, which is a little paradoxal, because if you know that it is him, you don't need to ask him. Or the Magdalene that tries to hug Jesus, and Jesus says, "No, don't touch me. You have to treat me in another way." And he says, this Keating, at a certain point in our spiritual maturation, Jesus asks us to adapt to a new relationship with him. Since it happens without warning, few people are aware of it when it happens to them. It happens little by little, slowly but surely. We cannot have the relationship with God in the same way as we had when we were in our 20s, the beginning of the vocation, or in our 30s or 40s. The relationship with God also changes in the same way that we don't relate to our parents, or to our brothers or sisters, or to our friends in the same way in which we used to do when we were adolescents or young people, in case that you are not young people anymore. This means that, remember, when you had your great friends, probably it was more noisy and more affectionate, more sentimentalistic perhaps. And now you just sit and speak calmly. And that is normal, and you are not worried about that. So with God, it can happen also something similar. That now you have a less hard relationship, a relationship which is less sentimental, and it can seem that it's colder, but it is not. It has not fire, but probably it has the warmth of a very stable relationship. It has not high peaks, but perhaps it has not these dawns that are also typical for the impulsivity of a child, of an adolescent. Then also, it happens that God can purify your intentions. All of us, when we discovered our vocation, felt also that there were a lot of human reasons that make us closer to our institution. We were very well in that environment, that we received there perhaps something that we didn't have in our house, affection, time, people of our age. We have a very close friend that followed the vocation, and it also attracted us. Obviously, there was also a close relationship with God. It can happen a long time that God wants to purify your vocation and your motivation. And he says, you came here looking for a warm environment, and now you're going to fall in a cold environment. You like very much the family environment, and now I'm going to put you in an environment in which fraternity is not so clear. And then he asked you the question, were you looking for human warmth, or were you looking for me? Did you want me to support you, or did you want people to support you? Attention, because it is not a or chance. We are not angels, so we need also the human warmth. But it has to be purified little by little. It can be very compatible. I remember a few years ago, a woman came to me to speak moral conflict that she had. She had had a crisis in her vocation, and he had decided to leave her vocation. But at a certain point, she said, if I leave the vocation, the relationship, the nice friendship that I have with one of her sisters will necessarily suffer. I'm going to get farther from her. So she said, I'm going to wait, I'm going to think it a little more. And it happened to her what happens with many of the crises. Just you wait, and the crisis goes. Because you were very angry, because the mood, because some bad moment, and then you change, you adapt some things, you change some things, and it goes. But after that, she said, perhaps I have persevered because of only human reasons, because of friendship, not because of God. So she felt a little guilty, and she asked me, and I said, look, first of all, the fact of persevering in a certain moment because of human reasons, it can be nice. It is not perfect, but it can be nice because we are not angels, so it is good. But I think that it is better the fact that you have such a good relationship with that sister of yours that helps you to persevere. You have a stable point with that, and probably you build it out of fraternity, out of knowing that person, out of a lot of act of service. So it is part of the reward that God has provided you. Those who have led family, brothers, sisters, and so they will have 1,000 times more here in this life. So that is what saved you and your vocation. So we have to change, as we said, no? The way of relating with God, even in our prayer. The prayer, recommend the old treatise of spirituality, Garrigou Lagrange and Tanqueray, who speak about those stages in the life of prayer. The life more discursive, more meditative, more depending on a text, and the life and the prayer that is more independent of a text, of meditation, of words. It is more generic, it can seem, but it is the unitive prayer, the one that is closer to God, even if perhaps you cannot realize. Obviously, it is not out neither, because even Santa Teresa of Jesus used to say that she always took a book in her prayer, except for the Thanksgiving after Mass. All the other times, and she was a mystic and a contemplative, but she said, I must take a book every day to my prayer. So this is the first crisis, when you have to look for a new relationship with God, and you have to do it little by little, and the risk in this stage is that you don't pray anymore, that you say, as prayer is difficult for me, I'm not going to pray. I'm not going to enter in the chapel, or I'm going to enter in the chapel, but I'm going to think or to give my imagination, or I'm going to check my cell phone, and I'm going to answer to WhatsApps or whatever. Also, it will be a risk, but it will be pathological. And then we enter in the second text. This René Vocation, it is in the shortcut that I have told you. You will find the word text. It is a letter that this founder of a religious community in the middle of 20th century wrote to them. And he said, the risk of duration for us, for his community, as for every human enterprise, so also for us, is that of a certain wear and tear of the ideal pursuit and of the effort made to realize it. A wear and tear that would lead us to be content with mediocrity in holiness. And it is impossible. This is pathological. The first one, the need of reframing my relationship with Christ, is physiological. Everybody will have to face it. Mediocrity, not so much, because there is the choice of not to struggle anymore. And the condition for reaching the holiness is always the same, to live heroically virtuous, to very close to God, and to maintain the struggle. It can happen in a moment in which people do not struggle anymore. And it can merge with the previous one. As we are going to see in this conference, I have it only in Spanish, I'm sorry, but I think it is very nice, an example of how a person can find himself or herself because of mediocrity. And a mediocrity that was induced, the trigger was the excess of job, of apostolic job. So we are going to see this is the founder of a recent religious community, and she was going to speak about the letter of a young priest that she received. But you will see that it is not something between a nun and a priest. It is something that everybody with a vocation, even a vocation in the middle of the world, can say, hey, it is proper what happens to me. In the link that you can see it here, you will find the original transcription in Spanish and a translation into English. So let's listen to it.
A la luz de esta clave, deseo compartir con vosotros la carta de un sacerdote, pobrecito, que me parece sincera y transparente. Y quizá podría ser la carta de cualquiera de nosotros, también de una persona consagrada que vive en un convento. Leo la carta. Madre, el otro día salí chamuscado de vuestra casa, con la imagen de los bomberos que acuden afanados a apagar un incendio con las sirenas encendidas, alarmados, y al llegar al lugar se dan cuenta que no tienen ni una gota de agua en los tanques. ¿De qué sirve salir corriendo a socorrer a otros vacíos de oración, olvidados del Espíritu Santo? Vuestras palabras fueron fuego directo al corazón. A veces nos preocupamos tanto de la sed de los otros que nos olvidamos de nuestra propia sed. Debo enfrentarme a mi verdad. Se me va descolocando todo, hasta la fe. Yo la creía como un torreón fuerte, pero ahora está asediada por un ejército de dudas y me invade la debilidad. Hace unos días entré en la iglesia y, madre, sentí extrañeza, un gran vacío, ausencia de su presencia. Palpé una gran soledad. La belleza y dulzura de su casa ya no ejercían para mí el mismo atractivo de antes. y una tristeza infinita me hizo gritar: ¿cómo he llegado hasta aquí? Como escribe San Agustín, queriendo he llegado a donde no quería. Apoyado en mí, carezco de estabilidad. No puedo dudar de la llamada, me ordené lleno de alegría. La persona de Jesucristo irrumpió en mi vida y me arrebató. El sacerdocio me parecía un don inestimable. Daría lo que fuera por volver a experimentar los días en que mis manos temblaban ante el misterio en la consagración. Y sin embargo, ahora, recién ordenado, comenzaron a darme responsabilidades, a considerarme. Desde el inicio incluso tuve el apoyo de mi obispo y confieso que me gustaba, me sentía valorado. Pero rápidamente todo empezó a tragarme. Me enredé en 1000 ocupaciones y quedé atrapado por el activismo, la parroquia, las familias, los enfermos, los pobres, los jóvenes, las peregrinaciones y campamentos, las diversas actividades pastorales, las interminables reuniones en las vicarías y delegaciones. Hice de la misión el centro de mi vida y quería responder y agradar a todos, demasiado preocupado por dar una talla, comparándome con otros sacerdotes admirados y tratando de imitarlos. Valoré mi vida y la de mis compañeros sacerdotes por los éxitos cosechados. Pero ¿de qué me sirve ser tan buscado y reconocido si yo siento dentro de mí, un gran vacío? A veces he sido tentado de caer en un victimismo. Soy siempre el que da, aquel del que se espera soluciones y respuestas. Me descubro huyendo de las dificultades que me plantean, rehuyendo a las señoras de la parroquia para que no me encuentren en el despacho. Unas veces no cojo el móvil bajo excusa de estar atendiendo a alguien y otras veces salgo disparado fingiendo que me llaman al móvil. Vivo la vida a una velocidad de vértigo. Muchos días celebro la Eucaristía como un autómata, con rutina, sin prisa por lo siguiente, por lo que siempre me parece urgente. Rezo precipitado la liturgia de las horas y a destiempo, y mis ratos de oración los convierto en lectura de algún libro de espiritualidad o de teología. Pospongo el sacramento de la penitencia y me cuesta estar disponible para la dirección espiritual porque siento mucha inseguridad. Vivo queriendo sanar a otros y soy yo el que necesita sanación. Me siento solo en medio de una multitud que reclama al pastor, pero yo siento pérdida de vida. Trato de paliar la soledad tantas veces enfrascado en el ordenador, en los correos, en arreglar papeles y a veces incluso buscando compensaciones que aún me consumen más. ¿Para esto me hice sacerdote? Yo sé que no. Creo que di por supuesto el amor y lo dejé enfriar. En el fondo, fiel a sus cosas, pero sin estar con él.
I think, as I said, that we can identify independently of how long we have living the vocation with this letter and find ourselves in this very risk to devote ourselves so much to the apostolic work that we can forget that the important issue in our lives is the relationship, the direct relationship with Christ. My favorite text of the Bible is Mark 3:14, in which we read that Jesus chose the apostles and invited them to be with him and to go to preach. And I think that it is the chronological order, but also the logical order. First to be with him and then to go to preach. And even if you are preaching, you have to be with him. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Let us go to the third crisis, a physiological crisis, which is the midlife crisis. We remember perhaps this quotation by San Josemaria: when people reach the age of 40, married people want to get married, friars want to be priests, doctors want to be lawyers, lawyers want to be engineers, and everything like that. It's like a spiritual hecatomb. So what happens when people arrive to their 40s? It happens that there is a physiological calling of initial enthusiasm, that people older are not so on fire as where they were as young people. Then we find what Romano Guardini used to call the crisis of the experience of limits, of our own limits, that we are not so brilliant, so intelligent, so strong as we thought, but also the limits of the other people. I didn't arrive as far as I wanted because of the people that were around me. And so there is an accumulation of wounds, the biographical wounds, the deception with the people, even with the institution. There can be a disenchantment with pastoral work, which is more heavy. I don't see so many fruits. I thought that I would be able to change the world, but I see now that I cannot change neither myself. There is a certain disenchantment with the vocation, but better with the idealized vocation, with the idea that everything would be nice and great, but it is not the real life that can be for borderland, but not for this land. A neglect of the interior life, as we have just said. The appearance of physical ailments. We can also find that when you arrive to the 40s, you have to live with a lot of physical limitations. The need of something new. Some people are more stable, some people are more stable. The people who are more anxious to or is more easily bored with the same activity can suffer more the crisis of the 40s. They need to adapt everything to this phase of the life cycle: the sport, relationships, the work, the lifestyle, the rhythm, and the sensation of now or never. It is perhaps the most specific of this age. A person 40 years old can still begin again his life or her life in a radical way. He can find a new job. He can find even a new person with which to spend the rest of the life. But he says, if I arrive at 50, 55, it will be much difficult for me, perhaps even impossible, to find a way of redoing my life. So that is the most specific for the crisis of the 40s. But this is, as I said, a physiological crisis. Everybody will have to arrive at the end of the middle of their age and say, hey, am I happy with my life? Do I want to go ahead? Do I need to change something, to do some adjustments so that I can wait in the second half part of my life? And finally, we find the burnout, the syndrome, which is a pathological crisis that can come to some people. I'm not going to, we are over the time, so I'm not going to speak, but you can find texts that speak about that, the reason, probably usually people who are very who accomplish very well, tend to accomplish very well their tasks, that are very ordered, perhaps a little perfectionistic, and it arrives a moment in which they cannot anymore. They have worked out of strength and voluntarism, and something breaks in their minds. So what can we do to get out of those crises? The first thing is remembering that God loves us. I have read several texts, and I will show some of them at the end of the talk, and they all coincide in saying, if you want to go out of the crisis, you have to begin by the fact that God loves you. You have to rediscover God's love. So no duties, so no, I have to do this, I have to do that. The important thing is that you realize again that God loves you, even if He has permitted some pain for you. The second thing is looking at Christ. And it is the most important thing. We have spoken mainly about psychological issues, but what will help us to go ahead with our vocation is the God that loves has for us, and also the will of identification with Christ. It can help you to go back to your good times, to a time in which you took the decision to follow God, to follow your vocation. And that can be a support for you in the difficult moments. He who began a good work in you will carry it on until the day of Christ Jesus. So go back to the decision, go back to Galilee, as Pope Francis used to say, do the grateful memory, and rediscover what you were looking for. And as we said, doing an examination of conscience if perhaps God is asking for me a purification. Valorizing what we have got by our vocation. How we have become richer, and we have developed a lot of talents thanks to our vocation. When I read this book by Jordan Peterson, The 12 Rules for Life, this phrase shocked me a lot, because he says, sacrificing ourselves for God, or if you want, for the greater good, does not mean suffering silently and willingly when a person or an organization permanently demands more from us than they offer us. And here I saw faces of people who had suffered important crises, and they couldn't get out of them. And they said they were a little resentful with the institutions. And it can be if you think that the institution, the director, superiors, and so are asking me a lot, and I don't receive anything. So perhaps there is a lack of perspective, of acknowledging how much has grown, both humanly and spiritually. And also, from the point of view of the director, superiors, and so, it is also a responsibility. Is this person also growing from a human point of view? It will be a support for his perseverance, for his fidelity in the vocation. Then Pope Benedict says, it shocked me when I read this number of Deus Caritas Est. Man cannot live only out of oblative love, only out of giving to others. We also need the horizontal love. We need relationships. We need friends. We need a family life. We need fraternity, so as to be sustained in our vocation. So I done this. It is a book that I recommend. This book, The Broken Gods, written by a psychologist, a lay psychologist. This Gregory Popchak is pronounced. I think it gives you a good reading for improving or for fostering these things on psychology and spirituality. So a few books, unfortunately, not many of them are translated into English. Two of them are. The first one is Jacques Philippe, Thirsting for Prayer. It is not a book to introduction to prayer. It's a book written for people who have been, for a time, trying to pray, and they are blocked, and they cannot find ways of praying well anymore. So it is a help for people who are in this crisis we have spoken about. The second one is The Return of the Prodigal Son by Henry Nouwen. It is a classic in which he has some successive conversions. From the beginning, he realizes that he has sinned, he has to behave as the son of the good father, and so he humbles himself until someone tells him, hey, you are behaving not as the younger son, but as the other son, you are despising the other people, you are superb, you are comparing yourself, you are hard because your father didn't give you anything. And so he says, okay, I have to be more humble. And at the end, another friend tells him, don't look so much to yourself. Don't think so much that you have to convert, you have to struggle. You have to be the father. You are called to live the spiritual fatherhood or motherhood. So it is also, and that changes completely things when you don't focus on yourself, but on living. Mainly for a celibate person, it is very important to develop the spiritual fatherhood or motherhood. And finally, these other 3 books, Deslumbrados por el amor de Dios, not translated into English, written for a wide perspective for those people who are in the middle ages and they little working slowly. Or this other one, Damián Fernández Pirimonte, La Segunda Conversión, or this third one by Giovanni Cucci, La Fuerza que nace de la debilidad. It has a very nice chapter about the crisis of the 40 years old. So thank you very much. I have extended a little more than I was supposed to. But we have still 40 minutes, but the first thing that we can do is give us at least, if you want, 5 minutes of break, so as to be able to breathe a little bit, and we can retake the talk in other 5 minutes, okay?
Yes.
Okay.